I greet you, dear guests, friends, and subscribers to my channel. Alexey Arestovich is connected with us live now. Good evening. Hello. Guys, please do not forget to subscribe to my channel, to Alexey's channel, unless you already have done that. And by the way, while doing it, you may want to pay attention to the courses that Alexey often promotes on his channel. On the 19th of September, there is a new one on strategy. Yeah, that actually is today. So, if you're interested, follow the link. We'll talk more about the strategy today. And I would like to start with events in the Middle East. Many people drew parallels, times and times again, between Zelensky and Netanyahu. Zelensky went on incursion into Kursk district of Russia, and Netanyahu apparently is packing bags to go to the south of Lebanon to fight with Hezbollah full scale. Is it some sort of competition before the elections in the United States of America? And what do you think the events mean in the global world context, and of course for us locally here, expecting the plans and peace deals? Well, the problem is that both Netanyahu and Zelensky, they don't really have other choices. The rhetoric and the logic of events leads them to a certain funnel, and Netanyahu is considered to be a criminal in Israel in the eyes of many people for the 7th of October, for the failure of intelligence and failure to protect people. And international arena also has an order for his arrest and some of his generals' arrest. So he only has one way out. The winners don't get judged, so he needs to reach something that looks like victory or could be named as a victory. And besides their political destiny, there is also logic on the ground. Hezbollah and Iran formally supporting Hamas, and they're hitting Israel. Israel had to relocate 80,000 people from the north. That's a huge number for Israel. And the economy in the north is pretty much paralyzed, and they have to do something because they cannot continue with this frozen situation forever. He suggested to the government of Lebanon and to Hezbollah to go beyond the river of Litani that parallels the border between Israel and Lebanon, and go on the other bank and create the exclusion zone between two countries and solve the problem of security between Lebanon and Israel, as there was that buffer there before at some point. But Hezbollah refuses to do that. Lebanon refuses to do that. Israel would have posted this question in that fashion eventually, not even on the political grounds, but also because on the economic grounds, their economy cannot tolerate redeployment, relocation of 80,000 people. It's like in Ukrainian terms, we would have moved about 300,000 people from some of the districts. So they have to act. Why now? Because the elections are coming. They're pressing. Because after elections, everything may change drastically. It doesn't matter which candidate wins. And since now there are also in parallel big negotiations happening in a big triangle, China, United States, and Russia, where Russia is also somewhat a factor on the Middle East that can bind Iran to a degree in their actions, and the complex trade is happening across different topics, and some analysts connect Middle Eastern events with Ukrainian, so they have to react, they have to act on this, because striking peace accord with Ukraine will post Netanyahu in front of a very uncomfortable situation in November, when he would probably be the only aggressor in the world left at large, where everybody else are striking truce and signing peace accords. So he's in a hurry. How do you gauge that situation with pagers and radios and some other gadgets that blew up a couple days ago? Some data is pointing towards Hungary, that probably Israel intel got there. And why I'm asking this question of you? Because the opinion has split. Some people are saying that this is a very selective, but it's a terrorist-like attack that is horrible, that shouldn't be. And some others are writing that this is like a Trojan horse. It's a brilliant operation conducted by Mossad, almost like Hollywood style, and will probably become one of the operations mentioned in the world history of special services and special operations. So what is your opinion on it? Okay, let's look at the cliches that are being spoken about it, because what media is reporting and what you react to very often looks like a collection of cliches. Why Mossad? Why not Shin Bet, Aman, or other counterintel and other organizations within Israel? We don't know which of those organizations did it. Israel did not officially take responsibility. We can only assume that Israeli special services conducted this operation, right? We have 2 days of operations. First day, pagers blow up. Second day, some radios and other things explode. So if it is only Hungary where the explosives were planted into pagers, then we understand, right, that could be, we understand why they're exploding, because of the explosives. But what about the radios and Motorola's and the others? Are they also laced with explosives? Probably not, because they were purchased in a different place. That's why we still don't know whether it is explosives or perhaps some other way to speed up the battery to critical values, or maybe both. And other theories are being thrown into the mud to conceal and hide the real mechanism. So what we can say is that Israeli special services used some function or some method to blow up digital devices belonging to a certain terrorist organization. And it deserves more investigation about notebooks and kitchen hardware and some other things, whether they were blowing up or not, because there's a lot of falsities, a lot of fake information being dumped in the media sphere. What we can say for now, this is a new method in conducting military operations. If indeed it is Hezbollah's pagers, then we can actually call it the weapon of a very selective action, because Hezbollah is acknowledged as a terrorist organization in the world that attacks Israel daily with drones and missiles. So, big question how many civilians have suffered, but we can understand that there is no weapon that selectively destroys only your targets. And the way they blew them up, from what we hear, is that there was a special signal coming from high command and of Hezbollah, and that's why they brought these pagers in front of their faces or to their ears. And regular citizens should not be listening so attentively to Hezbollah commanders. And what happened on the second day, we are not exactly sure. We've seen some videos about radios blowing up at the funerals, but okay, so those are the facts. But I wouldn't hurry about the kitchen hardware and transportation, like mopeds and such, because that could be additional attempt at just muddying the waters. So that's why I would call that, in some fashion, some devices were blown up. From the military standpoint, this is a brilliant operation. It's a new step that has not been done before in that fashion, and it is also a step on the verge of military operation. Israel does not acknowledge that in the open, but again, New York taxi drivers were talking about that. Their policies and their attempts to talk to Lebanon was basically concentrated on letting Israeli troops create incursion into Lebanon and figure it out with Hezbollah. But they were not allowed to, of course. So they are planning their own actions, and that's part of those actions. And what they created is a paralysis of communication. And this is one of the main achievements you can have at war, is to destroy communications of your enemy. Nothing can match that, outside of utterly defeating them completely. And this is a great step. With this, they entered the world study books. Okay, we don't know who exactly. Right, we can assume it is Israel. Hezbollah will probably retaliate, looking at everything. United States already are sending messages to Iran to take it easy. Similar to the previous situation, please send diplomatic notes, etc. Let's figure out at the negotiation table. But Israel is not going for any compromise, or at least not until the elections in the United States. So what do you think America would do if Hezbollah, let's say, goes mad and Iran helps them and they all run at Israel trying to destroy them? Well, Alexander Netanyahu has a similar logic as Zelensky, that the West doesn't quite want to join the fight, but under certain flow of events, they would have no options. They will have to join. But since the West has more obligations in front of Israel than towards Ukraine, that there are more chances that they will actually go and fight with Israel against Hezbollah than they will increase their help to Ukraine. But I would also mention here that those two aircraft carriers that are near Israel, they're also aimed at holding Israel, that not only against Iran. I did warn Israel is that these two aircraft carriers are there to create American presence and to react on certain ultimatums and to conduct politics. It's not just to support Israel, it actually is aimed at controlling Israel too. And of course, there'll be a bunch of negotiations behind the scenes about different supplies of hardware. And this is typical Kissinger politics, real politics that America will try to continue with. And Kissinger was actually honing his political mastery on the Middle Eastern conflicts. And his logic is that if Arabs and Jews, or Russia and Ukraine, or USSR and China back in the day, have enough stupidity to fight, then we are, of course, against this war, but we will use the situation to its maximum to establish our control on both sides. So, of course, if Israel will be on the verge of being destroyed, then American and British aviation and probably some of the Arab coalition, as it was before, even Jordan, remember, hit a few missiles that were going through their airspace, they will be protecting Israel. That's why they are concerned that the Middle East is in front of rather big war, but I want to say that Iran is not looking for this war. Their political, economic, foreign political situation is not good to allow being hit directly. That's why they were more creative in their retaliations and responses. They're not doing direct measures. But Israel has already made a decision about the operation and going into Lebanon, no matter what Iran would think or Hezbollah would do, but this was the statement already voiced by the Minister of Defense of Israel yesterday. So in Gaza, they've achieved success. Is that what's deemed? No, in Gaza it's different. Smaller forces will be chasing the remnants of the terrorists. It's not a problem anymore. The biggest problem is in the north. Hezbollah is about 30 times stronger than Hamas. And the war there will be different, not like in Gaza, and this is a problem that needs to be solved, according to all the things we mentioned above. Otherwise, Israel will be facing partial economic collapse, and they really don't want to get there. Alexei, the situation on the Middle East, does it rattle Zelensky's plans, or does it aid him to convince Biden, as according to Le Monde publication? There's a new wave now that we immediately need to be invited into NATO, and this is a part of Zelensky's plan that is being again denounced by other media and politicians, and it's just supposedly a publication. But yesterday Johnson comes out, who's being criticized and looked into at his role in 22, but he also makes a statement that Ukraine needs to be included into NATO immediately. So this trump card, how is it truly such a card on the verge of Zelensky's visit to America? Well, Polish press is writing that during the scandal with Syrsky that happened at the security conference, they also talked about immediate inclusion of Ukraine into European Union. If peace plan that Ukraine has is to be included into NATO and European Union, then being gently, I would say this is a maximally ambitious plan that we could come up with. Because neither Zelensky, neither EU nor NATO would be immediate perspective on the horizon. Syrsky mentioned that it took Poland about over 10 years to get there. So that raising negotiation barrier to some insane level, combined with incursion into Kursk district and attacking Russia, some of the warehouses deep inside Russia, this is similar actions politically to what Netanyahu is doing. Increasing the level, the barrier of approach to such an extreme degree that it might actually give you some fruit at the negotiations. And trying to affect the process and get into the situation. And countries like Russia, China, and the United States are trying to solve something behind the scenes. And both Netanyahu and Zelensky, they just take plates, throw them on the floor, break them apart, and say, no, we cannot agree with that. And these are sub-threshold actions that have to draw the attention of the Western allies. This is a way to be listened to, the way to be heard. So remember, the visit of both ministers of foreign affairs of Britain and the United States to Kiev. At the same day, the visit of foreign affairs leader from China to Moscow. So that indicates that the trade is happening all across the world. Basically, it's a new behind-the-scenes Yalta agreement that is on the verge of happening. And there are two disagreement parties, Ukraine and Israel, who do not agree with how the negotiations are going, with where their place is, and they're breaking dishes. And you can argue with details and approaches and all, but right now it's difficult to judge it. You can only judge it later at the strategic perspective. The West is taking the side of dual ultimatum, both to Ukraine and Russia, or Iran and Israel. And they're telling, hey, stop breaking dishes, here are conditions for both of you. But I want to say that NATO will probably not be on the horizon for Ukraine, not in the immediate future, not in the decades to come. So we need to build a different strategy. We may be very close in relations with EU and NATO, binded by different special agreements, but not as official member, at least not in the immediate future, as discussed. Some media and some sources are saying that Zelensky is going to accuse the West in all the failures. Netanyahu perhaps is also going to accuse the West. The difference between Ukraine and Israel in this case is that Israel can actually fight alone without support of the West for a while. They have some strategic reserves, they have their own military production, and we can't, like at all. We are very dependent. But the situation still has certain similarities. And some people are saying that Zelensky and Netanyahu are blackmailing the West. Then, we'll turn to our people in the countries and we'll say that we had good plans to win, but these guys are preventing us from winning, pointing at the West. And we don't know if that is true yet. We will once the official accusations happen. But for now, it could be just raising the plank for negotiations, raising the barrier for agreement. But that's what it looks like. There's different opinions by experts being discussed, and I cannot say this is a final decision by both Zelensky and Netanyahu to accuse the West in everything. Although many people come to that conclusion. Indeed, it looks very logical, Alexei. Right, that's why it needs to be discussed, Alexander, because that's what you can see in both countries. We had the plan to win, and these guys from the White House or Whitehall precluded us from realizing that, from implementing it. We were doing everything. They were the ones who did not let us. And moreover, 1 second here, it is a complex situation. It is not black and white. There are a lot of shades that need to be discussed. And frankly, it is true to a large degree because both Israel and Ukraine will be precluded from utterly winning by that exact West. And it is still part of the truth, but the accents matter. The nuance matters. What will that victory or not victory lead to? What the agreements will be like? Well, everything still points to a plan that big players are solving something and these two don't like it. What does Zelensky not like? What pushes him to such a rhetoric? Well, we have two ideas about this. He doesn't like Russia not losing. Perhaps he really would want Russia to lose, as many Ukrainians. Second, he doesn't like that if he is pushed to peace agreement, part of the army and society will come to him asking a question, so what were we dying for the last 2.5 years? Demographic losses we suffered, economic losses, for what? For leaving part of our territory occupied? Then why do we need such a supreme commander-in-chief and a president? Somebody needs to be responsible for that. So who will be responsible then, right? The president or the allies that hamstring us? Similar situation, almost a carbon copy for Netanyahu. This is a very logical supposition to not be discussed, and there are definite similarities on both sides. Now, if it was one country, then yeah, perhaps it could have been a fluke. But there is a trend happening across the board. I would not fall into conspirology here, saying that it's 100% sure that's what exactly was happening. That's not my manner. I don't do that. But we can say that it does look like truth. We can even take it as a basis hypothesis, but we still leave space within this hypothesis that both Netanyahu and Zelensky, they do want, honestly, to prevail over their foes. And problem is that if Israel has a chance to deal with Hezbollah, maybe not with Iran, but at least with Hezbollah, we have no chance of winning Russia without aid from the West. We are totally dependent on the Western supplies. If the West ceases to support us, we will not only not prevail, our enemy will probably crush us. So our starting positions are different. Netanyahu in Israel, Zelensky in Ukraine. But both have to answer in front of their people. Zelensky is not currently being accused in Ukraine. There is some opposition, especially from Poroshenko's camp, who accused him of removing mines in the Crimea area near Chongar. But this question will be risen louder at the end of this war, with the maximum seriousness about economy, demographics, and everything. And Netanyahu is already under these questions and prosecutions, and there are already demonstrations and organizations trying to chase him. He's already 1 foot basically in the legal proceedings on that in his own country. So he has a much stronger motivation, but he also has bigger opportunities to realize his plans. Zelensky, however, only has some hypothetical responsibility at the end of the war that likely will be asked a few uncomfortable questions. Now again, it is not criminal prosecution, unlike Netanyahu. But again, Netanyahu and his generals have more resources to act. They can act, they have more options, and also Hezbollah is not Russia. They have chances to actually win on the front by themselves. But I would say that I think they sincerely want to prevail, and they sincerely think about the international consequences of losing or unacceptable peace being signed, being enforced at the end of this war that somebody has to answer for, and preferably not them. So complex motivation, that's what usually happens in life, right? You want to eat tasty and you still want to support your body, not get fat, stay fit. So that's complex motivation just about having a meal. Talking politics, it's a lot of times more complicated. Well, so there are people are starting to ask questions of Zelensky already. Some singers, Pranuk, Karchishin, other well-known people like Voice of Radio Rock, Kuzin, who record a poem basically asking him a question: how did you sell Ukraine? The coffins, the war. I'm not going to read that poem, but a certain group of stars in the poem, in the poetry manner, are addressing Zelensky. Is it a sign, or those bells of those consequences of loss that Zelensky is afraid of? Well, first of all, this is the upset in our society about the way the war is going, about the losses. But this is only the beginning. The real wave will start when the martial law will come to an end and the hot phase of the war will end on the front. When civilian affairs will come back to life, when there will be civilian movements, etc. Imagine what will start happening when the elections are announced. They'll remember not only Chongar, but many other things. And one can say that it may lead to protests in the street and probably some perspective of legal prosecution. I want to remind our viewers that there was a great person by the name Churchill, who was a giant of the international politics, and actually one of the key figures of the Second World War, who did not let Hitler win, who definitely saved Britain. Half a year before the end of the war, he loses to the person who probably not too many people even remember, Attlee, who was perhaps a good person, and he actually was, but compared with Churchill, he was nothing. At that moment, half a year before the end of the war, society told Churchill, thank you, you did your part, now please go. And he was accused of different things, of losing big battles like Dunkirk and certain traits and behaviors and habits. But definitely he had less flaws than all the bureaucrats, and I'm not going to say during the regime of Zelensky, but I would say during the times of Zelensky, right? Because the way they behave now, they are absolutely shameless. Remember when I had a stream when I said I will be eating delicacies on a boat in the Pacific or in Atlantic? That was more of a figure of speech in my case, but they actually are doing that. Documented photos and all. So people will be remembering that. And these celebrities reading poem is only the beginning of this. Mariana Bezuglya, leaving the Committee of Defense and National Security, today she was voted and her request to resign was supported. But in her last speech, she appealed Zelensky to remove Umerov and Syrsky. So I have a question related to her appeal. How Syrsky and Umerov are beneficial for Zelensky at their positions? Well, first question, Alexander, would be, where do you find replacement? Many people for the last year and a half, maybe 2 years, are being offered very tasty positions in the government and they keep refusing. First, they understand that they will not be fully independent because the office is driving everything in reality. And then they'll have to be responsible for other things that they cannot be responsible for because the corruption of the lower ranks is out of their control. Because in the Ministry of Defense, everything is set up in such a fashion that regardless of the Minister of Defense, they have department heads who are actually corrupt and getting monies and getting kickbacks and everything. And the ministry is only bearing the brunt of attacks and carrying personal responsibility for the failures and successes. That's why it would be very difficult to find a commander-in-chief for the military, despite, of course, the generals having it as the life path to reach the highest rank. I don't think they'll find enough volunteers to take this position or enough willing people. That's one. Second, these people have been tested in a good sense, battle-tested and crisis-tested. They have worked with Zelensky for a while. Umerov is actually from his inner circle with Yermak and Zelensky. Syrsky has proven himself for their political leadership as well. So about a year and a half ago, I think, there were decisions made by Commander-in-Chief and the General Command that strategically were mistaken. They are leading to our front crumbling today. And if they will not be corrected, fundamentally, we are running a risk at repeating Pokrovsk situation in 2 or 3 more places. So, and this is probably a perspective of a few months, unless there is a peace accord stricken before that. And somebody will have to be responsible for this, because the real crumbling of the front is not just some accusations by Mariana or some military experts, people who are trying to discuss situation in the military, myself, Butусов, and the others. These are real factual things, another collapse, another crisis on the front, so somebody will have to be responsible. And that's why the question about Syrsky and Umerov is rising up. Mariana is sort of looking in the future, saying that it needs to be addressed. I started bringing it up about a year ago. In my streams last autumn, I started saying that this will lead to the front collapse, and I was accused of being Moscow narrative supporter, etc. I even had to leave the country. So these decisions were mistakenly taken. Somebody needs to bear responsibility for them. So how do you see, Alexei, looking at the next 2 to 3 months of autumn, how would that collapse? Do you want me to talk about the mechanism, Alexander? I can, sure. So right now we have over 1,000 kilometers of front, with Kursk even more. It is being held and controlled by UAVs. We don't have enough infantry. Now, if the weather becomes more difficult, even in the good weather, our infantry is trying not to indicate their position, because if the enemy discovers where they are, they start attacking it with any means they have. So discovered position usually lasts maybe for a day or 3 at maximum, because their FPVs, their gliding bombs, their artillery starts destroying that position. That's why our infantry is in deep defense, very hidden, sitting concealed, and only when the enemy is really close, that's when they start rifle fighting, and that's who is holding the front line at the end. But before that happens, it's UAVs that are holding enemy. But it's also difficult because radio electronic warfare is intervening, and both sides are trying to control the front line with aerial drones. Now, the strong side of the Red Army, probably back from a century ago, was seeping through the border, seeping through the front line. And they are using a UAV to guide sometimes even one person through small cracks in the front where nobody has the eyes on. And they plant him usually near the line of logistics supply. And they start controlling logistics and other routes where we use to bring our troops, to evacuate wounded, to bring supplies to them. Even one person can cause damage. He can destroy, for example, 2 soldiers carrying a wounded person, right? Or a medical vehicle or a logistics vehicle. And if it is a bigger group, 5 people, 15 people, and given our front situation, given the lack of infantry there, they succeed in doing that from time to time. And in order to kick them out of the newly acquired positions, we need a second line of defense. We need special trained troops, special trained infantry that knows how to. And it's special training. It's not basic infantry training. You need to be motivated. You need to have good physical condition. So this is the proper way to deal with this seeping through. We need a second line of defense on the level of the company command posts. So the front line and then the second line that actually acts as the fire brigade that reacts to all the difficulties and things happening and these seeping through, where they can quickly run and remedy the situation. Recently, what's his name, who said that? The head of committee starts with a Z, Zavitnevich. So he said that mobilization will be felt in our troops in about 3 times. This is the window when the front may start crumbling. 3 months until then. That's why in many places of the front, it's already crackling apart. It's just we're looking at Pokrovsk at large and its most concentrated area for review, but you can look at more news coming through. Here and there are little signs. And if you look at the infantry, most people want to be UAV operators, right? They want to be in artillery and intel, but not the meat and the infantry. So mostly infantry are the ones who were forced to become infantry, who were trained horribly. Our facilities for training are ridiculous. Mariana was publishing a lot about that, and Voronchenko, who was actually investigating and reporting on the horrors of training and the terrible situation there. Voronchenko was removed by Umerov, and that's direct responsibility of Syrsky as well. So they both were saying that nobody gets any good training, and it's not only lack of training, it's also demotivation that is happening there. So those who are forced to fight, who are captured in cities, who are being demotivated in the training facilities, they're being thrown as infantry on the front. Now, some of them will get lucky and they will get to the experienced brigades where they will be made into good soldiers, but majority will not get there. And many of them will die because anybody not in the trench, they're a good target. Many of them who are not trained, they will either desert or refuse to fight. So this is a serious issue. And regardless of how much you draft with such a training system, the quality, effectiveness coefficient of that system will be horrible. And people from the front are already ringing bells saying that the draft is a failed draft because people that they get from the training facilities, they're very poorly trained and demotivated. And that's why I'm saying we are facing a probability of the second or third Pokrovsk failures, maybe even sooner than that. But if we strike truce, then nobody will see these consequences. And I want to say here, while nobody's listening to us, thank God if that happens, because if the front collapses and we have to sign after that, any peace accord will be in much worse situation. So it is better for us, Alexei, to sign, to negotiate peace now. Well, yeah, definitely now, or actually it was even better a year ago, but as you understand, if there'll be failures on the front, despite of us holding Kursk district, which still remains to be held in order for us to use this card, it's a difficult time. What Putin needs to strike peace accord? Oh, Putin doesn't need anything. He's saying he's ready to negotiate. He's also facing some negative trends in his situation, but they're more global, of a global character. They're more removed. The main task for Putin is to trade his position between the West and China, and also if you had India and the Turkish world, the Great Turan, as it's also called. 3 days ago, there was another interesting agreement signed by, mostly initiated by Turkey, but it's a Turkish-speaking world, and they go all the way from the south all the way up to Yakutia in the north, actually different peoples, and they're discussing removal of barriers, which is also dangerous for Russia, that will be affecting Russia in the south and the middle of Russia. And it's more influential for Russian situation than China in some aspects. So they are reorienting a lot of things in Russia. They're calling that Belousov's plan, and I will call it Belousov's plan, even though he's not the only person who invented that. They are increasing the rate of services, the percentage of services in their GDP. They're starting to process more of the minerals that they mine, and specialists are saying that they're going from 54% of their budget dependent on the oil exports. They went down to 25% of budget dependent on that. They have other tasks in Russia, cleaning of the elites, repositioning Russia to face Asia more than the West. And if they were following their propaganda that Ukraine apparently is very keen on listening to, and Russian propaganda keeps saying that Russia is fighting with NATO and it's a last war and we either die or we win. If Russians themselves were believing this propaganda, they would be mobilizing and getting almost 100% of their country to fight this war. In reality, this is not what's happening. They're facing more complex problems, and this is just the propaganda piece. They have to rebuild their foreign political doctrine to provide some stability in the multipolar world. They really do not want to do mobilizations because that will worsen the inner climate, and worsening of that will slow walk all the reforms that they want to conduct. They, by the way, keep arresting different military generals for corruption almost weekly, and they have several dozen of different level commanders under investigation, unlike Ukraine. Nobody steals here, nobody makes mistakes here, nobody to be punished, right? And they even have bigger problems of strategic positioning between European Union, United States, Britain, India, the Great Iran, and China, and there is also Africa and Latin America. So unlike what both propagandas are telling people, that this is the war till the nuclear ash with the West, and Ukrainian propaganda that this is the war with eternal enemy that ends in victory or death, none of that is true. This is a rationally managed conflict with rational goals that behind the smokescreen of propaganda are being discussed and achieved. And Putin right now definitely does not care about going to Lvov, capturing the whole Ukraine. He has other goals and tasks. He needs to show the West his borders and his powers, and to show that Russia, with support of Iran and the other countries, is ready to fight for their borders. And when the West understands that message, that's when they want to trade and reorganize the world politically and economically, and that's where they're going. And Ukraine is just a place where they're solving some of these problems. They could have been doing this in Africa, but it's a little further for them, not so convenient. That's the real situation. The West understands that, and they're trading in this framework. Their main goal between EU, United States, and Britain is to prevent Russia from joining China, so that they would not be facing a second Mongol empire that, as they call themselves, seafaring countries or countries on the ocean will have to struggle. But they also have to take into consideration that BRICS, for example, bloc, already has a bigger GDP than the West combined. It depends, there are different angles how you calculate that, but they're pretty close. So this is the bigger game, and what we are looking at here is just a part of that chessboard. The chessboard itself is huge. And what we're observing is that bipolar world, single pole world is turning into a multipolar world. And countries are concerned about the political influence zones, their borders, their political perspectives. And Russia is definitely going to play the card of multi-vector country. They'll be trading a bit with Turkish nations, with China, with Africa, with the United States. They're not going to jump onto one side or another. They are enjoying their position in that. And what's happening is the global order. Their main message of Russia is that they're going to fight for their positions militarily. Not so much as economically or other things where they may lack, but they're ready to take arms and fight for what they say they want. And that actually re-emphasized the need to rearrange the world in a certain fashion And they have proven it with this war. Here's another example that they've been successful. People were saying that Africa is controlled by Turkey, controlled by China, controlled by United States. Botswana lithium mines is now controlled by Russia. They were all countries, the United States, EU, and the others were fighting for it, but Russia is now effectively controlling those mines. Remember how many people are laughing, saying that Russia is sending Wagner troops while China is sending money, and laughing at Russia? Well, here's the result. Russia is actually achieving certain things where they want to achieve them. And this is part of a bigger global setup of the world. And the question to Netanyahu and us, where are our positions in this world? If we are just battlefronts, I disagree with that position and that situation. And I think I'm not the only one. You know, Alexey Nikolaevich, at this point, having heard your commentary, I start to see these infights with Poland, between Poland and Ukraine, very differently. Very differently. When Syrsky is saying that 20 years, then honest referendum, protection of United Nations, such a territory. So he's kind of outlining the future for Ukraine, and he is trying to remove the factor of Crimea in a civilized way. Yermak is answering to him, no, under no conditions, we'll never forget and forgive. Crimea is Ukraine, Russia needs to be punished for violating international law. Then all these other things, situations with Usyk, Zelensky conflict, exhumation of the bodies of that century ago events, they seem to be just the background of the main events. What do you think is wrong in our current relations with Poland? And main question, should we be talking like this to each other? To whom it is more dangerous, to us or to Poles? You know, it reminds me of the quarrels of boys on the playground who will be playing Harry Potter or who will be playing Peter Pan in the next game. Us and Poles are an interesting dichotomy. We're both friends and competitors, and we're great friends and very strong competitors. And I think in both countries the elites are lacking the understanding of global interests, because our global interest is to be in a very close union with Poland, that if needed, we could act as a coordinated political, economic, and military force that may fight for its goals and ideas, both with the West, with situation in the EU politically, and with Russia, if there is a threat there. But as I keep referring to that great movie, 17 Moments of Spring, the phrase that it's the infighting of small characters that's happening right now. We have global historic arguments, and some people are saying that these things are precluding us from realizing today's matters related to our survival. Well, if it is so, let's create joint commissions and close these matters to make sure that they do not affect our current relations. Instead of that, we're doing what? Ultimatums? We will block your agriculture products from coming in, acknowledge Volyn tragedy, otherwise we won't let you join NATO and EU, and on our side we scream that open the borders immediately, you owe us arms because we're eternal shield of Europe. You know that fairy tale about eternal shield of Europe is the Polish legend of about 100 years old. After the miracle in Wisla, they were telling the Europe that they defended them. And even before that, that was a myth created by historians of Catherine the Great in Russia, that Russian Empire defended Europe as a shield against the Mongols and Mongol Empire. So these conversations about who is the actual shield are being brought up since the 17th century. This is kindergarten conversation. On both sides, adults would have sat down at the table, put the barriers on the table, discussed how to resolve them. I'll talked about Volyn incident 100 times, how can that be done? And here are the interests, and let's start working on them once the barriers are removed. Military-industrial complex, political support. Of course, it will not be another Rzecz Pospolita, another political joint entity, but at least we can coordinate the politics of both countries, right? For example, with Romania, we have more quality relations. Given that we still have territorial issues with Romania, well, they're not as big as with Poland. Well, there is Bukovina, Bessarabia, there was some removal of peoples, the tragedy of Romanian army. many other things being discussed. But what is lacking is the perspective that the interests are more important than old quarrels. But us and Poles are very symbolism driven, and that spoils a lot of things for our relations to the utter elation of our enemies in Moscow and to be used by our allies in Europe. Because Europe is also paying a lot of attention to the Eastern Europe. They're quite concerned in the Western Europe about the East, whether the East will want to start acting differently and are they truly Europe. So looking at our squabbles, I'm thinking it's kindergarten. But Crimea suggestion, Alexei, is not a kindergarten. Well, Crimea, I think, is a good suggestion. It was being voiced even in the negotiation process where I partook early in this war. It was part of Istanbul Accords, and I do support it. You know why? Because on this backdrop of this global change process happening in the world, here's a big visual for you. Imagine a globe with a certain skin on it that where Washington is pulsating as the only center. And now that skin is kind of tearing apart as the Gondwana, the primordial major continent, is splitting into individual ones. And it will be a situation of strange situational unions and competition. Everybody is going into the phase of Byzantine politics. Today we're fighting with them, but not finishing them off because tomorrow they may be our allies against somebody else. And here one needs to understand that in this situation, when everybody is a foe, an enemy, a competitor, and a friend, it's important to create an island where you can devise and develop the system of international control and a process of how countries and participants with different interests interact. Because you cannot bring everything down to war, conflicts, and competition. You can create a certain process how otherwise geopolitical, geoeconomic quarrels can be resolved. And Crimea is an ideal place for that. It's a perfect scenario. Because Cyprus has been there for 40 years, other places have been for quite a long time, but Crimea is a new wound. And it's of interest to different countries, not only Russia and Ukraine, countries in the Black Sea basin. There are also transport corridors between Asia and Europe going through that area. So it's an ideal place to test such a process and agreements. Let's blow pagers and do other military things somewhere else, but here let's create an experimental platform where we can figure out how do we work as humanity, as different countries, to figure out the conflicts of that complexity. That's why I am a proponent of transferring Crimea under some international control. Because, of course, we will never agree with occupation, but physically we cannot acquire Crimea in the near future. So let's make something reasonable out of it for the whole humanity and for us as well. For example, international management. That should start with demilitarization. You cannot give a military base controlled by Russia under United Nations, right? So Russian troops need to leave Crimea, and that could have been used as a service, as an experimental ground for solving conflicts in a non-military fashion. But I'm afraid we are not there yet as the world. And first of all, Russia. Well, yes, that too. They're flexible enough, but I don't think they have enough flexibility to go with this solution. Let's talk about social, cultural side in Ukraine. There was a theater, more. They were on tour. And in Zakarpattia, the drafting committee basically captured all of their technical personnel. And the theater is now screaming in the social media saying that their tours are being disrupted. And of course, inner Ukrainian tour of the theater is a big thing during the times of war, but it ran into such an action by the drafting committee. And the drafting committee says, well, everybody is citizens, so we mobilize them. There's nothing special about it. Why am I bringing this example? It's just a simple example, right? This is not some horrible situation where somebody was, fighting with them, some rough captures of people in the cities that sometimes become part of the social media. But I'm bringing this as the process happening in our country. None of those citizens had reservation against being drafted, so we're just doing our job, said the drafting committee. And I'm bringing this as just a regular example. It's not even any strange situation when there was any special enforcement. I'm bringing that as an example to understand what's happening in the country. Drafting committee is grabbing people who work at the theater behind the scene, and here we have Fursov, Zhelezniak as the congressman are telling us that, listen, we've been thinking that there were rations, the economy will be horrible. We're actually looking pretty okay. Look, we have amazing economy. Our stores have goods. People actually can keep buying and living, even in the times of war, and everything actually works. This is a unique situation. Yes, Alexander. So what, is there any tool to break the bathtub with warm water, so that warm water where all the representatives of powers and their close ones are swimming and enjoying their life in, that the water would drain? Alexander, the war just re-emphasized what usually is present. It just shows it more. There is a well-known historian, Wallerstein, who came up with the term world as a system, and he had a term dangerous classes. He always said there are people on the lower levels and there are elites, but with the development of humanity, dangerous classes emerged who are doing something else. Lawyers, artists, scientists, and they got a certain influence on the people's masses. And since masses were becoming an important force in the society, given that they got the right to vote, communication and media resources, then people affecting these masses acquired a certain power. And dangerous classes, revolution in Russia of 1917 proved that elites need to work with those dangerous classes. They cannot send a 3-year-old or 5-year-olds to the quarries to mine ore. And if you don't know, by the way, ponies were especially bred type of horses to be able to go into those different mining operations and carry the loads out in the capitalist England, so that kids could also manage these horses. 7-9-year-old kids were pushing things around, pushing the loads with the ponies. So as the evolution was occurring, they actually understood that it's important to exert influence on that third class that is starting to affect the workers, and also to start control some of the proletariat, so to say. So to use soft force, purchase everybody, tempt everybody, and that has happened in Ukraine a long time ago. But intellectuals, they also usually one of the most vulnerable groups of society, and the stars and the movie and singers, they're usually pretty easy to be purchased. So there are elites who are safe in any eventuality in Ukraine, who would never be drafted. Their stores will be open. They always can leave the country. They can go watch the fight of Usyk. Remember the fight of Saudi Arabia, Usyk against his opponent? Half of Kiev was there. Mostly guys that could be drafted, right? But Uncle Vanya from a simple village would be the one dying on the front. That's generally what was happening throughout the history of humanity. And of course, there would be talking heads who would be explaining on the TV why is that happening, why it is important. Now, why our elites are not supporting that middle class and other classes of society? I'm not even talking about the moral side, where British, unlike ours, actually have their kids serving. American elites was also sending their kids to fight and to serve and to take active position in their lifestyle. Upper middle class, those who live well, their kids always thought an honor to go as an officer to American Army and to fight for the country. I'm not even going to remember the Second World War, but even in the First Chechnya in Russia, about 20-something kids of generals have perished there. And it was a much smaller conflict. And of course, one can say that a lot of cultural elites of Ukraine have perished during this war, have been participating, sportsmen and actors and others. Sure, but if we're talking about the political elites, they're not really participating. For example, 2 kids of one of our high-level officials are camping out in London instead of Pokrovsk. Right, and of course the serving personnel, the serving class to the elites is also not being touched. So this, let's be frank, this is the war of the poor who cannot bribe their way out of it, who cannot evade being drafted. Now, the next question is why the society does not squeeze a bit more on the elites to at least share a bit of that, to participate in everything, and why the poor are not being protected as well. Because the elites are not feeling danger. They only start to give privilege and to share stuff, some of their resources, with the dangerous classes when they feel threatened. And we don't have dangerous classes. We have some radicals, some on the right, who are actually fighting out there in the front. But there are not too many of them, and they're rather well manageable. In Ukraine, over the last couple decades, there is a system developed of how to bribe and purchase different political activists. And they either are being bribed and they serve one power or another, or they have to leave the country. I'm not pointing fingers here, but yes. And who represents the masses? Nobody. Because people are in a state when they do not even understand what their interests are and how they can protect them. But behind the political rhetoric and the war for your life and your country, you can keep them in black bodies forever. And yeah, it's a sad situation. You can watch the Forbes publications and explore how the main Ukrainian oligarchs are increasing their income. All of them have increased during this war. So some people are fighting in the groves and lying dead in the trenches. Others are getting richer. So in order to change that situation, the dangerous classes need to be present. Elites have already revealed that the danger for the country, for the nation, for the language, for people is not really a reason for them to change the existing economic situation that they exploit. The dangerous classes could have appeared during the 2010s or 2010s when there were a mix of criminality and political elites, and they were interacting rather closely. But the dangerous classes were rerouted during the first Maidan and then during the initial phase of this war in 2014. Remember during the first Maidan how huge of an ask was for society to change things. Yarosh, Parasyuk, and the right sector, they became the channeling systems for that request. But all that was siphoned out to war, and many of them are fighting and dying in this war. So those dangerous classes that are for the people, they're either expelled from a country and demonized, or they're fighting in this war, and they're a bit preoccupied at the moment. So the main thing that this war revealed is that Ukrainian elites, even facing the death of their country, do not want to forfeit the existing system of exploitation of the country and people. That will be a full frontal question at the end of this war. It'll be rising high and it'll have huge importance. Some people believe that military will come and change things after the war, but I'm looking at our military and I'm thinking the way they act on the front, we probably are not going to see any coup, any change of regime by military. But those people who actually are in their hearts for Ukraine and don't want Ukraine to lose as a civilization, and they also understand that this system needs to be changed, because if it remains, we can guarantee that we'll lose in a second round of war with Russia, or just in a longer race. Because Russia has already made conclusions and is changing its geopolitics stance and their economy, and we have made no conclusions. This war is not threatening the existence of Russia. It does threaten our existence, and yet we're still not acting. So if we do not start a change of a civilizational project in Ukraine after the war, and for that you'll need to change a lot of elites and the position of those dangerous classes also in our society. Because the project, if it's made by elites, it will not pull our country through. And one of the main things, for example, one of the main faulty statements, I think, is that the elites have chosen us to be an agriculture country. Not a technical country, but a country specializing in agriculture. We're destroying our universities, our engineering, and that destroys our military-industrial complex, and you cannot even hold your own as Israel. I'm not even talking about anything bigger, so like Israel or Korea. So this is a strategic mistake. It was made, and the perspectives are rather glum, rather dim for Ukraine. And another thing is that our conscience is very poor and humanitarian. As a friend of mine, high-ranking American spy, he said that our main mistake, and he was saying it with bitterness, that and I'm speaking verbatim, that we gave the management of Ukraine to the migrants from Ukrainian Liberation Army and did not control that. And they started building that big dugout of Ukrainian Liberation Army circa Second World War. And Ukraine is a multicultural, multinational state. So it was not a good fit for that model. People do not want to be part of that narrow project. They're voting with their feet. They're physically leaving the country. As Kняжицкий was saying, that there are hundreds of thousands of refusal from Ukrainian citizenship in Europe. And it's okay for elites, because any dangerous class or dangerous voice that they see, they may ascribe Moscow narrative to the person, and the trauma of ongoing war, this is almost a societal execution, and you get pushed out. Because you are, as you know, they're blaming you to be Medvedchuk's journalist, and I'm supposedly somebody who sold himself to Putin. And since the war is not helping to educate people better, and education system in Ukraine also remains to be evolving, to be evolved into something better. Right now it's pretty poor. And this is why the elites have prevailed, and at the cost of their dialectic win over the population, they are getting richer, but the country is already on the verge. It's about to die. And we either will have to change the elites and the societal contract for a modernized wide project, or Ukraine will be done with, even without any Second World War with Putin. We won't really run over the border of or the framework of 2035. We'll just run out physically. You know, you've been pretty harsh on the statements for the most part, but at the end you kind of made it softer. And I'll try to explain what I think. I think the problem in the situation that you described, the person who understands more or less and understands the historic processes the country is going through, it shows that the only possible way, Alexei, is to basically Lenin style of human revolution. Right, remember Lenin, who came from abroad and who pulled those tired from war, tired being oppressed by elites, and gave them factories, land, and everything. Is it the only thing? Well, roughly you can explain it this way. The question is, who could that be? Zaluzhny, who comes back from London, or somebody else who comes from somewhere? We don't know. But the question is not even in that. You can bring Zaluzhny on a shining chariot with winged horses. Who will be he relying upon? Who will be his team? Who will stand for him in front of all the elites who have media, who have power agencies, who have lawyers, who have huge resources, etc., 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 and also a bunch of scared neighbors who may be also concerned what's happening in Ukraine, another revolution, oh my God. And then, of course, Russia will likely try to use this mutiny. So here we are in a very difficult situation where our dumb elites have brought us, and the people who gave complete agreement for elites to go on because they were sharing a little bit with the lower classes. Everybody was stealing in different areas, and they were not checking on each other. And of course, some technologies of political division, East-West, Russian-speaking Ukraine, Ukrainian-speaking Ukraine. So all that technology on separating the groups. So yeah, we do need a leader who will come back to the country. That's not an option really otherwise, because we cannot expect elites to come back to their senses. The country was for 2 years on the brink and still sliding down. The front is starting to collapse. The elites doing nothing. And it's not about how much money they give to the front. They do. Akhmetov, Pinchuk, they do donate a ton of money. The problem is that they are eager to donate money, but they're not eager to change the system. And you cannot really solve it with money. You need to change the whole system. And they're not even thinking in this framework. I'm not thinking they're evil. They just think this is the right way, and the only ones who think they can figure it out. That's why my prognosis, I don't know what part of my words you thought that I made it softer. My prognostication is mostly unfavorable for after-war rebuilding during the next 10 years after the war. The only option is or sending some revolutionary leader, or perhaps some power within Ukraine will crop up and say, no, not any longer, we need to change things. There are some conversations about it, but it's not yet politically formed. And we need to go, understanding that we need to go to modernize, to industrialize the country, and we need to make it and keep it a wider project, not a single nation, one language, one type. And we need a larger collective system of security in Europe that would allow us to solve conflicts between us, between Belarus and other countries in a non-military fashion. But we do need a strong military in order to be heard at the negotiations. You cannot just ride out on the surf of morals and ethics. That's why you need energy complex, you need military complex, but it's such a high framework that is almost unsolvable for the country that the chances for aliens visiting us is probably higher than this happening. I want to say that our politicians left the center for the left side towards Tymoshenko and to the right side. There are specifically more on the right as well. I'm curious how 25 right candidates will be sharing 25% of electoral field. That'll be probably a circus. Imagine how they will have to fight internally. All of them are patriots, army, speech, faith, and starting with heavyweights and smaller characters. The center right now is empty. If people will understand that our salvation is only in modernization and a wide project, then the party that will occupy this central sphere may get a lot of support. But I'm afraid they may be marginalized and may be blamed to be Russian spies and might collect some people but will not be able to become a strong force. And that would mean for the country only one thing, an abyss without other options. Alexey was our guest today. Thank you for sharing your ideas. Thank you for watching us. Do not forget to click like and subscribe. Take care. We'll see you.